Welcome everyone to the Western Museum of Flight. I'm Cindy Maka, the director. Of all the fascinating aspects of the B-2 program, perhaps the most fascinating is the process of testing the aircraft and proving that it was actually capable of doing all the magical things that it promised to do. This process, of course, is the job of the test pilots. We are fortunate today to have two such test pilots that help bring this aircraft into operational excellence and existence. So, Colonels Weiss and Lebeau, it's a privilege to have you here today. The podium's yours.
Thanks, Cindy. To take a minute to express our appreciation for being invited here to speak about an airplane that we really love and enjoyed the heck out of working with. That was a true privilege for us to be able to do that. And if you'll indulge me, I want to take a moment just to acknowledge my appreciation to my Lord and Savior for having been given the God-given talents to be able to be considered for a thing like this and be able to, and then the opportunity to be a part of it. As a retired U.S. Marine, you can imagine that this is kind of an unlikely place for someone like me to end up, but it was awesome. It's been awesome. So, 25 years of flight test in the B-2. It's been 36 years since the airplane flew, 11 years since this briefing was last given. And yet, witness recent events, our airplane, this amazing machine, is still making news in the world and having great impact on where she gets to be used. I want to take a minute before we talk about the brief just to give you a sense of the two of us. Both of your presenters today joined the test force before first flight, so we're initial test team members. We were present for engineering, manufacturing, development, and production flight test as well, production acceptance, significantly different from the later on production kind of flying that went on. We were there for sustainment flight test as well, addition of new capabilities to the airplane, and the depot and maintenance upkeep portions of the airplane as well, those later on times. And just interesting to note, you're looking at probably the two most experienced terrain following pilots in the airplane that haven't had to do that while we still had that ability. Tom Lebeau joined the test force in 1983, gaining a little over 1,600 hours in the airplane since then, and becoming Spirit number 5, the fifth pilot to fly the airplane in 1990. He was an operational test pilot for the Strategic Air Command, of all things, but a test pilot school graduate, which gave him the distinct honor as well as being able to be part of flight sciences work, not something normally that an OT&E pilot would do, and so he was involved in flight control testing and flutter testing and such. He was the pilot that brought our airplane back from Guam in 2012 that had had some year or so prior to that an engine bay fire or a tailpipe fire that gave the airplane considerable damage. So he brought a significantly patched up airplane across the ocean back to Palmdale so she could be repaired and returned to service. That's something of an adventure that you might be interested to ask him about that later on. On a different note, these other two items, the company test pilot has the unique privilege of being able to work with engineers and bring new systems into life and be the primary pilot input into how those are going to work for the pilot. Tom was our test pilot for that, for the smart bomb rack assembly that you'll hear more about here, and the GBU-57 or massive ordnance penetrator. So he's the guy who made sure that those things would work for the air crew that needed to use them, again, of recent events. So for myself, I joined the test force in 1987. I've gained a little over 2,000 hours in the airplane, became Spirit number 10 in 1991, and I was responsible for the first flight of ship number 5. First flight and all the production testing of ship number 8, that was ACC-1, Air Combat Command's first airplane. And ship number 20, which was the airplane into which we inserted modifications, upgrades to the defensive management system and a whole new suite of displays. So we're going to take a little bit now to talk about the beginnings of the airplane. And so as we go, we'll be talking some about history, and we'll be talking some of the testing, some of the employment of the airplane, and some interesting and unusual things that you may have heard of or maybe not have heard of that we can, and then we'll be able to move on to some questions. Tom.
Good morning. In early 1983, the government awarded Northrop the contract to develop the Advanced Technology Bomber, which eventually became the B-2. It was going to be a low observable design, survivable at high altitude, and importantly, it was going to have a nuclear mission. These are the specs the airplane was supposed to meet, and I want to talk a little bit to have you understand what the nuclear mission implies, the design of the airplane. A nuclear airplane with a nuclear mission has to be able to sit manned alert. And it means you have to fill it full of fuel, weapons, put it on the ramp all closed up, and leave it there for days at a time, and to be ready to go at the last minute. Taxi, start engines, taxi, take off, get airborne, align the navigation system with the radar. GPS will not be available if you're flying in a nuclear environment. And get to the target thousands of miles away and deliver a nuclear weapon accurately to the spec requirement. Now, as any program, the B-2 wasn't any different. Everyone starts stirring the pot after a contract is awarded, and some of these people are saying, well, we should probably have a third crew member, and if you design an airplane to have ejection seats, you have to check ejection seats in the configuration you're going to have. So on the option, there might have been a third crew member. Northrop did test a 3 ejection seat configuration of the B-2. They were all good. Fortunately, after that, the desire for the third crew member went away. And in fact, the requirement, the design of a pilot Wizzo airplane went away as well, because the commander of Strategic Air Command said, this airplane will have 2 pilots. It's going to fly missions that are going to be too long, and you need 2 pilots in that configuration. Obviously, everybody wasn't completely convinced that you could make an airplane that's survivable at high altitude and all kinds of environments. So the desire to have a low altitude penetration capability, terrain following, became part of the program. That caused a significant delay because the planform had to change. Structurally, the diamond and 2 wings configuration that was very good for high altitude flight was not going to survive low altitude, high speed. The structure requirements where you had to have structure was just not there. And we then went at that early part of the program to a flying wing with what we call the sawtooth trailing edge. Now, Don is going to take you through the numbers of the flight test program, which I was only there for the beginning.
Thanks, Tom. So here's a list of our flight test airplanes, ship numbers 1 through 6, and you can see the primary missions to which they were supposed to be dedicated when they came on board, but they all contributed as need be during the course of the program to flight testing as needed. Once EMD was complete in 1997, the ship number 3 was kept on for follow-on flight test. You can see that indicated. And when we'd done enough work with her, needed to move on to another one, ship number 18. And later on, then in the vicinity of 2020, ship number 20 came on board for, again, that modernization program that I mentioned. It's interesting to take a look at the numbers on there for flights and flight hours, and you can see that during EMD, flights and flight hours significantly exceed the post-EMD numbers, but consider that during EMD there was 6 airplanes contributing to all of that work, and post-EMD it's a single airplane. So those post-EMD airplanes were put to very good use, getting the work done that we needed. More interesting to take a look at, in the lower left, almost unobtrusive, is that note about 58 software drops during EMD. That was about 7 drops a year during the 9 years of EMD that we did that work. And those drops brought in fixes to software that were discovered, but also brought in new ideas, new things, upgrades that folks thought that the airplane would need to have. So along with those new things, though, came another thing called regression. Every time we got a new software drop, you have to test all the things that it wasn't supposed to affect and make sure that they still work. No collateral damage, that was the idea. It's a relatively expensive proposition and added a lot to the test program. Perhaps even more significantly then, because it existed as well for the follow-on flight testing, where new software drops also brought a regressing testing requirement. We'll talk more about that a little bit in the impacts to terrain following. Airplane was responsible for a large number of firsts, both to its program, but to the aerospace industry as well. One of the big ones that doesn't seem to get spoken about much is this was the first operational flying wing in the world ever. There are other flying wings that had flown but never established as an ongoing operational capability. Pretty neat thing. So the near precision bombs up front, 2,000 pounders, 500 pounders, is a neat thing. I like to point out though that Northrop Grumman, Northrop at the time, pushed a thing called GPS-aided munition, or GAM-113, that was a 5,000 pound GPS-aided munition, and we were doing that before we really got into these. Some of those were actually an operational capability for a while until the GBU-28 came along, and that's the fielded 5,000 pounder, the more normal one. I'd like to talk a little bit about the composite structure, because among those firsts, the program was responsible for what at that time was the single piece of composite to be baked all together in a kiln up at Boeing. And on a note about the fuel system, the airplane was always lauded for its fuel system as being really, really tight. And Tom and I were remembering in, I think it was 1991, when we took an airplane back to Washington, D.C. for Stealth Week, and it was sitting in a hangar fully fueled, along with several other airplanes as demonstrators for congressmen to visit with their families and such. The total lack of any kind of fuel smell in that hangar, despite that. The flush-mounted pitot ports is an interesting thing to talk about as well. There was some discussion early on, before I got there, to be frank about it, that should we have a flight test boom or not? And the decision was made, no flight test boom, we'll just fly the airplane like it is. There was a little flight test boom, maybe a 6-inch thing underneath the left leading edge, but the purpose of that and a beta vane on the top of the airplane were just to give the air crew some numbers should they feel like they weren't going to trust what was coming out of the displays. But otherwise, the airplane flew on those flush air data ports and did very, very well, and she's still doing very, very well. They've been really good. On a side note with regard to that, we were provided an air data off switch in the cockpit. And if the crew was having problems with air data, then they'd be able to turn off air data and provide the flight controls a set of fixed constants off which to work. But we never had to use that in anger. The whole thing worked, and it was great. Tom mentioned the nuclear emissions, so just a little further on that to lean on the integrated federated architecture. A really neat system, especially for a tactical aviator or Marine coming out of the field. You'd go to an airplane that was all set up for alert. The air crew slaps a switch on the nose gear that opens up the crew entry door and starts up 2 aux power units for the airplane. They climb in, they hit an auto start button inside the airplane. Then as they're sitting down, strapping in, and the ground crew are preparing the airplane in the back and closing the pressure door on the way out, the airplane is, all 4 engines are starting, all the avionics are coming up. All they have to do is close the crew entry door and off they go, ready to go. Software-intensive airplane, things change in the world, upgrades have to happen, and no surprise, lots of things have been done to our airplane. Our original conventional radios were switched out for airborne information terminals, AITs, that in addition to providing more flexibility in dealing with frequency settings, gave us some SATCOM capability, the addition of voice and texting, and as well a file transfer capability. The Link 16 system, a data link system, was added to the airplane so the airplane could participate in the modern battlefield. We always had a phased array radar, but at one point we had to change the radar because there was a reallocation of frequencies in the frequency spectrum. And after considerable hand-wringing over how to do that, opted for a more expensive option, this active electronically scanned array radar. But that was actually a really good thing to do. That antenna gives the airplane considerable growth potential in that antenna, as it can add many more capabilities. It's flexible to add things with upgraded radar processors. The computers that we started with were sort of space shuttle era Intel 8088, Commodore 64 kinds of speeds and storage capabilities. Some of you might remember those sorts of things. They've been upgraded into integrated processor units, where processors were taken, put on cards and inserted into these integrated processor units, as well as adding a fiber optic bus. So both speed and storage capabilities were increased several orders of magnitude. And I'm going to hand it over to Tom to talk some about weapons, the fun stuff.
This is a display of all the weapons that B-2 could carry. From the very beginning, it had the capability to do what was most important, and that's drop a dumb bomb on a target. It's important for the nuclear mission because nukes are dumb bombs. You release them, they flag ballistic profile, and they hit the point you intended them to hit based on where you released them in space. The nuclear weapons were the first ones ever tested by the test team, so that when the first airplane got to the wing, they had a nuke authorized to be deployed on the B-2. The nukes were carried on the rotary launcher, which was a very useful way of suspending them. You could have quite a number of nuclear weapons on a rotary launcher. 2,000-pound weapons, which it would also carry the general purpose 2,000-pound bomb. You could carry 8 of those on each rotary launcher. 2 weapons bays, 2 rotary launchers. The only other gravity weapons that the airplane could carry initially were the 500-pound dumb bombs carried on the racks. Those could only be released as strings, much as the way we bombed during World War II. Eventually, the engineers, as Don pointed out, Northrop was working on GPS aiding to dumb bombs. The idea is to take the dumb bomb and give it a navigation capability, ability to take it away from the ballistic profile. So eventually, the successful development of the JASSM made the B-2 a real powerhouse as a conventional airplane. You could put 8 JDAMs on a B-2 rotary launcher and 2 on the airplane. You could have a 16 aim point capability that you could strike with only 1 pass through the target area. You're not dropping each of those aim points as a single bomb run. You do 1 bomb run, you get 16 bombs. Eventually, other GPS-guided stores came about. A standoff cruise missile, and Don mentioned earlier the EGBU-28, which was a bunker buster. GPS is fine for conventional warfare, just not for nuclear warfare. You still had all these 500-pound bombs in the racks. And there was one particular problem with 2,000-pound bombs. They're very powerful, and sometimes a mission planner wants no collateral damage. That's not a good weapon for that problem. So they really wanted that 500-pound bomb also to be a GPS-guided store. And we were set to work making that happen. It was one of those program changes where they say, well, make this work, but don't change how the B-2 does other things that influences it. And you gotta fit the way the B-2 thing's done to provide what you need for dropping smart bombs off of racks. We had to work with a weapons computer that was designed from the beginning to only deal with 16 aim points on a target. So we invented a linked target complex, which you would take 5 targets and tie them all together so that when the crew member made changes, it changed them all. Like if you changed the center or the center aim point, it would change all the corresponding aim points, and you'd have that control. Rack weapons have less flexibility than a rotary launcher. The rotary launcher, like if you had nukes on there, would automatically rotate to have the next weapon that's got to come off the airplane to be at the 6 o'clock position. The crew didn't have to do that. It was done for them. Happened in the background. With rack weapons, you have release sequence restrictions. You can't drop an upper bomb over a lower bomb. So when you're targeting aim points with these weapons, the rack release has to take into account not to release a weapon until it's gonna clear the rest of the weapons to fall. And you'll see that in a video I show. You'll see how the sequence is interrupted by a weapon who's not yet close enough to its aim point to be released. Once it goes, everything else above it follows. It'll stop again as another weapon is not close enough to its aim point. All this is done automatically. The crew doesn't have to be involved in that at all. Since Don brought it up already, I was involved with the MOP. Had the Lieutenant Colonel Jeffords and I had the great good pleasure of dropping 4 MOPs in flight test. We did the missions that cleared the weapon to be released to the Air Force. It's a 30,000-pound massive steel weapon, fills up the whole weapons bay. You don't load it on a rotary launcher. There's no room for a rotary launcher. Fills up the whole weapons bay. It's got its own suspension system. It has pins fore and aft. It has 2 arms that come down, grab those pins, and explosive bolts cause the arms to open, and the weapon falls away cleanly. It is a GPS-guided weapon, and your target will have 2 aim points. The first aim point, hopefully, is what you wanted to hit. The second aim point is, in fact, that same first aim point, because the idea with the MOP to get better penetration is to fly it down the same hole the first bomb made. Requires a lot of accuracy, and it was fairly successful. When we did our test, we didn't actually test that capability. The wing was doing that later. You want to make sure to know how accurate the second weapon was by not doing it someplace where you couldn't measure accurately. During the B-2, once it got all this capability, all these JDAMs, became a force multiplier. If you think about how missions were conducted in World War II, bomber missions were massive raids of hundreds of airplanes, dropping strings of weapons over an area that hoped would include things you wanted to destroy. In Vietnam, attacking the targets in North Vietnam, we used fighters that dropped bombs carried under the wings, and they were salvoed off. Took several sorties to go after a target, not a very good CEP. Finally, by Desert Storm, we finally had a stealthy airplane, the F-117, that had the capability to drop 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs, very accurate, less than 10 feet CEP, and you only needed one sortie for each target you wanted to destroy. But by the time 2003 came about and we had already developed the Smart Bomb Rack, the B-2 has a massive amount of ability to go after as many aim points as you can imagine. 16, take however many you want for each target, 2,000-pound bombs. 80, take however many of them you want, and you get 500-pound bombs. There just weren't enough targets toward the end. Don's going to talk about flight test execution.
So we had a really, there's just hands down successful flight test program. No accidents, no major incidents. We're going to talk about some things that were really interesting, and maybe you would think that those were really big, but not in the bigger picture. The whole thing was awesome and a great thing, again, to be a part of. Here's a standard airplane envelope, and the way you progress into it is in the middle. We're no different from anybody else. Go into the middle, open up the envelope a little bit, show some capabilities, open up your ability to do some of the initial work you need to do, move up to higher altitudes, higher Mach numbers, back to lower speeds, finally go down low and go fast where the higher dynamic pressures are and greater stresses on the airplane. Of course, necessary for our plane as well with the terrain following capability that she had. As developmental testers, we tested out into the service envelope. That's that yellow and red hashed area out to the right. And we have to test out there to make sure that if the operators went out there outside of their operational envelope, the airplane would be safe and could be safely brought back inside the operational envelope. And you'll notice in the upper right that note about a AOA limiter. The airplane had an AOA limiter, and it and the Mach limit were really related in some way. Every airplane has a pitching moment, CM alpha, pitching moment due to angle of attack. And when you have an airplane that pitches up a little bit, you want it to naturally pitch back down, have its own natural stability. And our airplane is a stable airplane in that regard. But if you get too fast, eventually that pitching moment changes and the pitching moment goes the wrong way. If the airplane pitches up, then it would continue pitching up. That's true with too fast, and it's true at too high an angle of attack. And we'll talk about those two characteristics in another slide in a little bit. What I really wanted to bring to your attention in this slide is we started the flight test program with sort of a rough idea of how we wanted to proceed in the first 12 sorties. It was just kind of a back of the napkin understanding between testers and the planners and engineers and such. But that little back of the napkin plan got to a senator of Vermont, who will go unnamed, who, because of after watching the first few sorties of the program, high visibility, hostile environment, high expense, and of course no plan ever survives first contact with the enemy. It wasn't doing that well either, and made life hard for us. But the neat thing about our program was we had some superior top-level leadership that kept those folks at bay, dealing with what they had to do while we could focus on doing good test work where we were at. There are some neat things that we discovered that needed to be discovered, and that's why you do flight test. I like to talk about these because if you could walk up to the airplane, you could see these things. The elevons, those surfaces at the trailing edge of the airplane that you see in the graphic, are the control surfaces of the airplane. And we found that wind tunnel estimations of their effectiveness were incorrect, and the elevons didn't align the way that we had wanted them to on a design condition at high altitude and high Mach. So the fix for that was a relatively simple one: reflex the trailing edge so that they angled up a little bit and they were moved back into the position where they needed to be. We called them pen trim elevons. In a similar manner, but a different impact, on the outer two wingtips of the airplane, we have split rudders that are used for as speed brakes or as a rudder for directional control. But if you're in penetration, you want them closed because they'd make nice radar reflectors, which you don't want. Found out that at higher indicated air speeds, they could be sucked open by the air loads. So again, an initial fix to them with the flight controls tailoring a slightly higher hydraulic pressure to be able to work on them, but not a desirable thing for the life of the airplane. Ultimately, the fix was another aerodynamic one, bumps at the end of the speed brake, so that aerodynamically those loads were overcome and the speed brakes were held closed. Another flight control issue that I would call, this was a major change to the airplane, as you might imagine, to the entire pitch control law of this fly-by-wire airplane. The original design used angle of attack and airspeed as a primary feedback, thinking that, and I believe as well, that those are good things to feedback because that's the way conventional airplanes fly anyway. It's how pilots feel air loads. It's how the airplane actually balances aerodynamically, the wing and the control, then the tail surface in balancing the airplane. A right natural thing to do, but for our airplane and in this flying wing turned into one, a really big trim task for the air crew keeping up with in big speed changes, and a serious trim task for the flight controls in adapting to configuration changes, landing gear up and down, speed brakes open and close, especially weapon bay doors open and shut. The problem was that if the flight controls, you could put a patch into the system so it would know what to do when those doors were opened. But if a sensor failed, such that the flight controls didn't know that was happening, then you'd get a G on the airplane that would be excessive, could hurt the airplane, so it had to change. We switched to a P plus I, or a proportional plus integral kind of flight control system that's really like all modern day fighters. It's a pitch rate system. So in the alpha Q, the pilot pulls on a stick and the attitude changes a little bit until he trims the stick back out and it stays there. In a P plus I system, pilot pulls on the stick and the airplane builds a pitch rate and starts to rate up or push and rate down. Then when he lets go, it stops where it is. And that worked out really, really well. We kept the alpha Q system for takeoff and landing. Again, it was the natural system and it works really well there. The airplane lands and takes off like a dream. On an interesting side note again, when the airplane was first flown, there was some concern that our alpha Q system might overload the flight control computers and they might all restart, and that would be a bad thing for the crew. So if there was a problem with the flight controls, we had a backup flight control system built into the airplane. It was called DSS. It was a P plus I control system, and the air crew had a switch. So the air crew, if they were having problems, could switch with this toggle switch to the DSS system. So interestingly, again, though, we eventually went to a control system that was a lot like that backup system as the primary control system. So I said I'd talk about this again a little bit. So we had a Mach limit, and the Mach limit was a important part of that was CM alpha, that pitching moment due to angle of attack. And we had an angle of attack limiter that was also there to keep the air crew from pitching into an angle of attack where that pitching moment was not what you wanted. The faster and faster you got, the smaller and smaller that angle of attack that limiter became. So the space that the air crew had in terms of angle of attack to pull on the airplane became less and less. And so now couple those things with a slippery airplane and you could get yourself into what we called a coffin corner, where you're a little downhill, you're accelerating, and you're accelerating faster than you have the ability because of the limiter to pull the airplane out before it goes too fast. And we did have a crew actually have that happen. It was interestingly in 1997, the vicinity of that, where they were doing spec compliance, a test point that had already been accomplished in the program. They were out there just gathering clean data to demonstrate spec compliance. Let it get a little bit out of hand. The airplane got too fast. She actually got outside of the service envelope, the place, the limit to which we were supposed to be just testing. And in the control room, they were observing the flight control system beginning to become unstable. They did recover, and so they became the fastest B-2 aircrew alive. Fortunately, they're alive.
Still alive, yeah.
So another thing that we found that's interesting to talk about was called RPO, residual pitch oscillation. I'll talk a little bit about that first before I run this video. The first thing about this video is what you see and you'll hear is the initiation of a flight control test program. It was a system that would run the surfaces to oscillate the airplane, drive the airplane in the way you want it. This isn't going to be a video of real RPO, but it is the correct motion. And the motion was essentially the short period of the airplane coupling with the first wing bending mode of the system, and then of course the flight controls working into it, and at a speed, it needed a particular high speed. What really drove this thing was weight and weight distribution and center of gravity location, and then at high speed under the right kinds of combination of that conditions, you could get a natural oscillation that we did find was damped. So it wasn't dangerous in that regard, but it wasn't desirable. In fact, if it was happening and you pulled G on the airplane, they would couple and you'd get more G than you want. So we needed to not experience it. And we got to that by establishing some guidance in weight loading of the airplane, CG, and we established some warning caution advisories that would tell the air crew, hey, you're getting close to this, you should back off, slow up. So let's see if I can make this run.
2, 1, now.
77.
Golly.
Now those of you that have an aero engineering background, any aero engineers in the crowd? So you will have studied flutter and you will have seen videos of much worse than this, pretty certain. I know I have, but some of this is a real testament to the strength of this airframe. It's an amazingly strong airframe. There you go. So, well, just to back up a little bit, you be the judge. I said there was some concern about calling this flutter. No one wants to use the flutter word. That would be a bad thing for a program. It was an aero servo elastic phenomenon. You be the judge. There are always strange things that happen during flight test. I'll just talk about a couple of these. That don't believe everything you read. We had multiple computer systems. It was the flight controls and the avionics, and they're talking in different cycle times. And they have to communicate to each other and make each other aware of what they're doing. But if they're out of sync, then and you don't get messages across, we ended up early on with warning, caution, advisories that didn't mean anything because they were a mistake, because the systems were just not well coordinated. And the third one down I really like. Our flight control system ran nose gear steering, so if you were turning the airplane on the ground through the rudder pedals, the nose gear steering is being managed by the flight control systems, and it needs to be told what gains to apply at different speeds. So we told it what to do at less than 7 knots and what to do at more than 7 knots, but we didn't tell it what to do at 7 knots. And so someone hung out at 7 knots just long enough for the flight control computers to all go tilt, and decided we better fix that one. Okay, so back to Tom, and again, the really fun stuff, the weapons.
Okay, the graphic of the two methods of carrying smart bombs in the B-2. You see the rotary launcher. You even see an EGB-28 in the lower part of that picture as an example of how big that weapon was compared to the launcher it was carried on. And then you see the rack weapons. I've got 2 videos for releases using the extensive capability of the B-2 and the way you attack a single target with multiple aim points, and you only go through the target area once. First one is a Whiteman sortie that dropped 8 JDAMs against C-Vans on the Nellis Desert. This was again one pass, The airplane did all the work once it was set up by the mission planner and the crew, and the weapons came off when the airplane got close enough to its individual aim point. Rotary launchers took care of moving themselves to the best spot. That's what a 2,000 pound does to a C-van. Whoever had the Northrop cleanup got us a big day. Notice the gap in the release. This is a guided store release. These were 80 weapons dropped in one pass through the target area against 80 dimpies. When you see the gap, that meant that the airplane that was going to drop, the weapon that was going to fall the next in the string, actually caused the string to stop at that point and then continue when it was good. This is a revetment simulated in the desert. They did a lot of stuff to give us things to aim at. The barrel, which would represent an airplane in a revetment like that, is no longer there. I said I will show you an 80 dimpy drop from a B-2, and in fact that was. But what I didn't tell you was that when the mission planner worked through this simulated airfield, they only found 72 things they really wanted to destroy. That left 8 dimpies. Dimpy is a desired mean point of impact. I'm sorry, I keep using it because that was the terminology we used all the time. So the mission planner permission and made 8 other dimpies, part of that same complex, and then he thought he'd have a little fun. Okay, the B-2 has been very active since 1999, flying missions in support of the military desires of the United States. In Kosovo, this was one of the first ones where we had 8 dimpy capability, 16 dimpy capability. First time GPS guided munitions were dropped in combat. Very successful. Afghanistan was the incredibly long mission flown from Whiteman, was so long that the wing decided after the crews left the Afghanistan area, they would land at a forward operating base and a buddy crew would take the airplane home to be prepared for the next mission. That's the longest, those are the longest missions that have ever been flown in the B-2, even what you just heard about recently. Iraqi Freedom in 2003 was really the heyday for the B-2. It flew 49 missions, some from a forward operating location, some from Whiteman, dropped over 1.5 million pounds of ordnance. And this was all prior to be declared fully operational capability, which happened in December of that year. I think they probably had enough evidence by that time. The last one that they participated in this time period was against Libya. There were airplanes in hardened shelters, and they took out all 45 of them. I know you've all heard about the use of the B-2 against Iran just recently, using the MOP I described earlier. 14 MOPs dropped on two different targets. Of course, I don't know the specifics of I don't get that kind of briefing anymore. I've been not part of the security establishment since 2013. So I'm sure if it didn't hit the target, I'd be very surprised, because if you watch the way that first one goes and how accurate it was to begin with, the second one wouldn't have any problem getting to that target. When we did the test, in flight test, we did make one attempt for a dual drop that was not successful. It turned out the designers had put such a tight G tolerance on the MOP that during the course of flight to get to the second release point, the airplane exceeded that G tolerance, and with rack weapons, you can't put the launch countdown on hold. It goes to fatal fault at that point. So we didn't drop the second weapon. We suggested they look at the situation with the airplane between the releases, and we were able to do that double drop successfully. You might think a 30,000-pound bomb coming off your airplane, you're now instantly 30,000 pound lighter at a same alpha you were before. All you get is a slight rise. There's no heave, there's no, that G I mentioned was probably due to the fact that I had turned the autopilot, I hadn't turned the altitude hold autopilot, and the airplane get this gentle rise, and instantly says, hey, I'm off altitude, and it goes and corrects, which you didn't really want to do at that point. So it is a most successful employment of the B-2. Another example of a target, actually from the early first use of JDAMs in Serbia, there was a river bridge that they wanted destroyed. The F-16s tried and several times and failed, and they sent one B-2 with 8 JDAMs and no more bridge. Don, you're gonna talk about the crazies.
The crazies, the fun stuff, weird stuff. So there are always naysayers. This was a highly qualified person we're talking about back before first flight. And folks who believe for whatever reason a thing is not going to work. And this gentleman is certainly one of those who should have understood. We'd flown flying wings before. There's no reason it shouldn't be able to do this again, but there you go. We had, part of the origin of this slide was one of our engineers that helped give this brief first had been in an elevator with a television crew before first flight, and those folks were commenting that they didn't think the airplane was going to fly. However, the airplane crashes make for great TV, so thought they were going to have a good thing. So anybody know that there's a kind of a standard line? How can you tell that a B-2 aircrew is heading to war? Anybody know the answer to that? Somebody must know. Okay. The lawn chair, exactly. So we didn't think about people needing to take a nap while they were flying in those long missions that were going to require 2 pilots. But you need to, so the group commander at that time, a former CTF member, Colonel Tony Amandi, kind of gave it some thought, him and his folks, and they sent some folks out to Walmart, buy a bunch of lawn chairs, bring them over and lay one down behind the ejection seats, and then they'd go back there and take turns taking a nap so they could both be ready when they got into the combat area. That's probably the best acquisition ever accomplished by the U.S. government. This stuff you can Google now, and I encourage you to try it. It's just fun to read about. Believe there are people that think the world is flat. There are people that don't think we landed on the moon, and there are people that we have electrogravitic drive and artificial intelligence in the airplane, and we're using extraterrestrial neurochips. But I'm telling you, no, or maybe we do. In that note, though, every good thing needs to have a patch, so we put these patches together. It's a hat tip to the 1962 episode of Twilight Zone. Aliens had a book titled To Serve Man. Their line was that was how they were going to take care of us. It was really a cookbook. And so the bottom says they taste like chicken. Airplane's been a star in a number of movies, either as background or as a primary. The personal favorite, top left, Independence Day. We watch that on 4th of July at home. It's always a fun thing to do. Of note, Tom said first combat employment of the airplane was 1999 in Kosovo, but it was really 1996 when the airplanes employed nuclear-tipped missiles against those alien spacecraft. Again, there are always naysayers whenever you go out and do things like you're taking LO surfaces into rain, or you're trying to do terrain following and do it in rain. People are going to say, oh, you're having trouble, look, that's no good, you know, you're not going to make it. But again, having done a whole lot of terrain following in rain, the airplane does that really well, and all of these things were overcome, and this was an awesome capability for the airplane. I didn't talk about it before, but it's worth mentioning here. The regression testing that I was talking about earlier was actually the ultimate death knell of the terrain following system. Every time you do that, every time you upgrade the systems, you know, we needed to check that, so we needed to recheck the terrain following radar, and that was a lot of flight test, and that's expensive flight test. And and in the meantime, the system just wasn't really getting used. So after a lot of hand-wringing, eventually, primarily due to the cost of keeping that system up, terrain following went out of the airplane. She did a bang-up job of it, but eventually it really just wasn't cost-effective. Okay, so there's perhaps a common misconception that stealth is invisibility. That is not the case. I imagine nobody here really believes that, but on a little more explanatory note, just to talk about it, what stealth really does is reduce the detection range capability of parts of that integrated air defense system against which you're trying to fly. So if they do see you, they won't see you till a whole lot later. Hopefully they don't see you and you know where they are and you fly between, but if they do see you, they don't see you till a whole lot later, and then if they do see you, they only see you a limited number of times. So they see you late and they don't know exactly where you're going, so they don't really have a good reaction time in order to be able to bring systems to bear against you. That's the real value of stealth. This is going to be a video where the Whiteman folks are having some fun, so they call it a stealth mode. Maybe there's a stealth mode, maybe there's not. But what you'll see is the airplane down low over the water in humidity will create large areas of condensation, just like fighters in air shows where there's humidity will pull and they get a cloud over the back of the airplane. Well, you can tell we're going fast because these areas are transonic flow over the airplane when we're doing that. So we'll let this run in just a second, but I want you to notice this is going to be real RPO. The airplane is actually oscillating just a little bit, and to watch those areas of condensation, particularly that one at the trailing edge in the little armpit there, and you'll see it getting big and small, big and small. That's a demonstration. The airplane is actually oscillating there. Things are going on. Here we go.
Gauging stealth mode now.
I'm really surprised that the Whiteman folks would release this video. This is, but they were good enough to let us have it. Okay, so that beyond 25 is not beyond 2025, but it could be. It was beyond 25 years of test, but the airplane is still advancing, and many of the things that we're doing then, we're still working on now. Big surprise, not that big a deal. We're still working on the DMS system, working to modernize and improve. The world of threats changes, you have to keep up. That never stops. The displays have been improved to LCD displays. And so we're always working on improving what's being presented there. We're always working on communication systems to be able to integrate better into the warfighting world. You have to keep up with there. And as to weapons, I'm going to hand it over to Tom.
Well, we broke a lot of new ground and tested cutting engine technologies with the B-2. It was the most enjoyable program you could imagine being involved in, to have the opportunity to fly this beautiful airplane. We always found unexpected things in flight test. I did one of the early sorties where we exceeded the operational Mach number. It was a planned test. We were supposed to go out to 200s faster, and see that the speed brakes came open automatically and that we got a warning that we were exceeding it. So, test point done, we backed back out. Problem, it was still telling us we were exceeding the speed limit, and we were all well under it. Well, how are we going to get rid of this noise we're dealing with? Well, you can go back against it once, and we did. We went back to the same point, got the effect we expected, backed out. This time the airplane fixed it, but they were able to find out what caused the first failure and get that fixed. We had tremendous special pressure, scheduled pressure, and we didn't rush, we didn't do stupid things. Development doesn't ever end, particularly when airplanes today are so software intensive. The capability is impacted more by the software in the airplane than by the platform, than its aerodynamic capabilities. We had a good time doing this program, and come on. It's not letting me touch it, Don. I'll try it with this hand. There we go. There's a string of weapons. Those were gravity weapons, and it's just the way it goes off on the ground. Nice photo chase for the landing here. You had to get hosed down every time you had your first flight in the airplane. The maintainers took great pleasure in doing this, but also other crew members who hadn't had their chances to fly got involved. I actually got hosed down 4 times in my career in the B-2. Once when I retired from the Air Force because I wasn't, once when I flew it the first time, another when I retired for the Air Force because I wasn't going to get to fly it anymore, they said. And another one, I'm missing one there, but the last flight I had in 2013, I got hosed down again. Don, I guess it's time for questions.
Yeah. Thank you, folks.
Every time I moved my hand, this hand, it kept flipping the slide.
So, let's just start here. Yes, sir.
How much of the F-117 stealth technology was utilized on the B-2, and do you guys still share stealth technology?
Tom, you can, why don't we swap back and forth as we speak to that? Okay. Tom. And so the question is, how much 117 technology was used on the B-2? And no, well, I think the first thing I'm going to tell you is we can't tell you that. You know, that's a good question. And there's probably somebody here who knows some of that answer to that. But good try.
The B-2 didn't use flat plate design. That was a big change.
Yeah, I think, yeah, what Tom said is that really the big thing is that, and part of that early history is we were the first curvilinear Tacit Blue was a demonstrator, and then us, we were the first curvilinear airplane. You could say that much. Yeah. But there's obviously a whole lot more to it than that. Yes, sir.
We're familiar with the B-52 flying, and this is a composite plane.
B-52 pilot here. Come back over here. Tom, come back over here.
All right. Oh, that's right. I've got to be by the speaker.
Making of this plane, are we going to be able to see this the same time frame, or what is the aging?
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah, the B-52's been around so long. I hate to think how old I was when it flew first time. I think it was 6th grade. I enjoyed my time flying the B-52. As far as how these structures will survive, I give Boeing credit with the B-52 of a lot of design features that were really unique that allowed it to do what it could do with that huge wing and 8 engines. I'm not sure I'm enthusiastic about hanging higher powered engines on the airplane. Sometimes you can put too much power on an airplane. You're going to be spending all your time trimming when you've got too much power. The H model already had a little bit of that problem. So I'm not sure that the B-2 is going to have to live as long as the B-52 has lived. But it's such a small crew, such a small force. Started out as 132, got finally down to 80, and then an additional one under Clinton to make it 81. We're down to, I think, 19 now.
We went to,
Yeah.
Yeah, we went to 20, then 21, and now we've lost at least one, so we're at 20.
20, yeah.
I'm uncertain about the other one.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. So it's not going to be a practical crew force. Now it has capabilities that maybe the B-24 isn't going to have. The spec that they put out for the mass load capacity of the 24 doesn't include a 30,000-pound bomb, but it's got one bay. It could hold it. But when you've got 100, you would have had 132 B-2s, that would keep it around a long time. Look how many B-52s were built. That's why they're still around. Things that were built that long ago, you just can you build new designs, you modify it slightly, make it a little bit better, and then it survives.
So, let me just add on a different note. There's the B-21, B-2 kind of, there's an interrelationship there as well. You could say that sort of existed with, this is me opining, but B-1 and B-52, you might have thought, oh, with the B-1s, that would have some impact on B-52s, but really the B-1 ultimately became a limited airplane in a number of ways. And the B-52 is like a Soviet-era robust machine that you can keep going. Obviously, we keep it going forever, as long as you have that kind of environment in which you can employ it, which we do. We enjoy air superiority that allows us to take an airplane like that and go and do good work. But B-21, I think, was a major thing that brought our lifetime down into the where it was out in the 2040s, I think, something like that. But down into the 2030s. But some of these recent activities might have some more impact. It is more likely an impact not of another airplane, but more of the what's going on in the world. How much do you need it? How much do you have to have it? That, not a great answer.
If until the B-21 gets fully operational capability, I would be very wary if I were a foreign adversary of B-2s sitting on nuclear alert, just for the capability it has.
So, yes, yes, sir, way over there. The question is, the program started with a 40,000-pound payload. So, Tom, if you want to speak to that, was it ever increased?
Yeah,
Tom,
it went up. Yeah, it went to a lot.
Speak to the camera.
That's right. I forget.
We're recording you guys.
Okay. It was increased to allow the carriage of the smart bomb rack, and again for the MOP.
You do the math. 2 30,000-pound bombs.
The stress factor. Thinking about stress in the B-2, for the airplane that was designed for low altitude, high speed, maximum Mach number, maximum payload and fuel, you really can't over-G that airplane. It is over-designed for most of the flying you do, and from that standpoint. I myself got the opportunity, if you want to look at it that way, to get, I think I said 2.6 the other day, no, it was 6.2 Gs on a fly-up that was, it was either that or the terrain in front of me. And doing a lot of flying. The airplane, the stick jiggles at you when you hit 2 Gs, and of course the computer back there is recording every hundredth that you hit, and at the end of the mission they get this printout and says how many over Gs you had. They finally came to the point where they got a program where you plug what the airplane did to the flight and said no, there weren't any new over Gs. That one where I hit 6.2, they did that was shipped to. They pulled it and did a very careful inspection. There was no structural damage at all. Now, did it hurt the fatigue life? Yeah, probably. I don't know how you'd measure that.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir, close, yeah. I'm sorry.
Stall. Did you ever stall?
You mean, do we ever actually stall the wing? No, never. The airplane is never actually fully aerodynamically stalled. There are folks here probably know more about why B-49 and XB-35 and what went on with those and why Edwards has its name and how those flying wings would work. But for our part, never any real aerodynamic stall. Again, if you get to an angle of attack where the pitching moment to angle of attack is wrong, then you're pitching up and it's just going to keep going. Then it'll be like that dollar bill trick that you let go, where it just does this to the ground. We don't do that. Yeah. Yes, sir, there was that. So you're wondering how much control does a pilot really have? And if I stopped right there, we could have a lot of fun with that question, depending on whether we're talking about when you're at home or when you're in the airplane or wherever you are. But as far as the flight controls go, well, the pilot really is the primary voting member into a set of four computers that are each of them figuring out an answer and then comparing that answer. And then in our control system, they send those answers out after they compared them out to the flight controls and actuator remote terminals, some other terminals that then, again, compare what is supposed to be sent to the actuators to move the control surfaces. So there's a lot of comparison going on about what we put in. So we're a primary influence, but ultimately the computers create what goes out there. Now the computers are trying to create the motion that they think is needed for the flight, in the flight condition in which we're in, and the motion for which we're asking. And in that regard, we have total control. If we're not asking for anything, it shouldn't be doing anything unless we get ourselves into a place where, like if we're going downhill, we're going faster, 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 and the airplane is just sitting there. Eventually, she knows if she's getting too fast. Tom tested this. The speed brakes are supposed to open and it's supposed to slow down. But in that regard, the pilot has total control. But there's a caveat to that. The flight controls are working based on what they were told how to fly. You know, like when a bird jumps out of, gets dumped out of it, pushed out of its nest, it flutters to the ground. I like to think of it as it has a program, but it doesn't have all the constants. So it doesn't really know how to fly. It has a limited amount of time to figure it out. When it gets to the little further down, it's finally figured it out and off it goes. It figures out all its constants for it, and now it can fly. Well, our computers aren't like that. They have a set of constants, and so if you get out, this is the really tough thing about that exceedance of the service envelope. You get outside the service envelope, we haven't really told the airplane how to fly out there. It might have some constants, but we didn't test that. We don't really know what it's going to do. We have an idea, but we don't really know, and that's where it was particularly telling when I said that it was observed that in the control room, the control system beginning to go unstable, that means they were headed to a bad place. But they got back out of it before they got there. So yeah, the pilot has total control, but he's working with a system that doesn't necessarily, if he takes it to the wrong place, it doesn't know what to do. And now you don't really have control, and nobody has control when you get there.
Yeah, having the speed brakes come out as part of the design when you get going faster than the limit Mach, that works really well at high altitude. The problem is if it's happening to you in a dive and you're in high Q, you're not going to get much from the speed brakes. And that's why people in that configuration are really passengers at that point, waiting for the airplane to slow up enough that they can recover.
Yes.
This question, you said when you dropped 30,000.
So he's asking about the rise in the airplane after dropping a 30,000-pound bomb and what's going on there.
Yeah, what you see is just a slight increase in attitude and a slow climb. It's my thinking, it's the flight control saying, well, this is the wrong alpha, and correcting it and to climb. Now, the autopilot, that when I talked about that was a single weapon release. I asked them to look at how the profile was. For the single weapon release, I had left altitude hold on. And in that case, although we got the small rise, shortly thereafter that, the autopilot says, you're off altitude, and it makes its sloppy correction, not the way I would correct it, but it goes below the altitude and flies back up. And a little more G than generally you would put on, that you would need to put on to make a correction. You could just milk it down.
Yes.
This crazy sort of equipment, were you able to talk at all about?
The question is, can Tom talk about how, what it was like to fly that damaged airplane back? And that should be really
Yeah.
nice.
You need to know what our ground rules were. It was a 40-second fire, a 40-minute fire on the B-2 on the ground during an engine start. The Northrop pulled as much damaged material as they could off of the airplane, patched up other things. Really, it affected all the flight control paths through the left wing that had all to be restrung. And the ground rule was, this is a less strength capable airplane now. You can take off, you can fly back to Palmdale, but you only get to land once. So if along the way something caused me not to make it to Palmdale, I was going to have to land someplace else, and that's where the airplane was going to stay until Northrop got back in there and did more work on the airplane. We had to have VFR capabilities for the takeoff at Guam to Hawaii, because that was a place we could land along the way. And then we had, you could have landed at Vandenberg if you couldn't quite make it to Palmdale. That was one of our options. You had to consider that if you had a system problem that caused you to descend in altitude, you now have to go, you can't go as far with the fuel you have. They didn't want us taking off at heavy weight because the potential for turbulence, which might exceed the G capability of that weak configuration. So we took off at lightweight. We climbed to altitude. Once you get above 26,000 feet, they said the potential for having that kind of a problem is reduced. We refueled up to 300,000 pounds and started our way back. And hopefully, the interesting thing was, at 300,000 pounds, it was a 2G airplane. But as I burned fuel, it got lighter and lighter, so my G capability was actually increasing. Just, I wasn't going to use it, but it was there. So if we hit turbulence, it might not do any significant damage. But eventually, when you get to Hawaii, you now burn down to where you haven't got enough fuel to get to Palmdale. So we hit a tanker. We refueled Hawaii, and I have to say this. Fortunately, I was in the left seat, the right seat, and the pilot was an experienced Whiteman pilot who has night refueling qualified. I hadn't night refueled in 2 years. It was safe. I felt confident of doing it, but it wasn't going to be a smooth operation. I was going to get inadvertent disconnects, and it just took too long to get the fuel so we could get to Palmdale. So while the other pilot was refueling, I was looking at the fuel, and I was looking at this tanker, which had half his lights out, which was not helping the situation. And I finally just got in, he was doing very well, and I said, Earl, just take it all. And he got the gas, and then we got to off the coast. We were now too heavy to land at Palmdale. We took care of that with a fuel dump. And we landed at the low weight we were allowed to land at Palmdale. Earl made the approach. They said we did a flyby. Actually, no, he did a non-precision approach, which he needed to do for currency.
So who else? Yes, sir. Does the B-2 have any defensive capabilities? Let me just speak to that.
I think their crews carry weapons.
The real answer is the airplanes. Any other sailors here? Anybody that so there's a, in the Navy, ships have a main battery. That's the big gun. Our airplane's main battery is her stealth. So she has a defensive capability. It's not be seen. That's the thing that's really important. And and that's about all we would want to say to that. Way in the back. You're asking if the B-21 is the same airframe as the B-2. I could say categorically
it's
no.
Significantly smaller.
It's not the same thing at all. And so the interesting part of it, as an outside observer, we're not part of the program, and we're not current employees anyway, but look at the plan form, look at our plan form, look at what our plan form was supposed to be.
Yeah, exactly.
And look at what it is. It's, they were not encumbered with the low altitude, high speed mission with which we had to deal.
Yeah.
So that's pretty straightforward, but absolutely not. It's not the same thing at all. Is there anything from the YB-49, XB-35, any of those programs that came forward to us?
I've got something.
Tom has some. Go ahead, Tom. Here, the mic.
Yeah, we were briefed on the landing qualities of the flying wings that had existed in the 50s by Max Stanley, who flew them, because there was a lot of uncertainty about how we would feel in ground effect. We did tests on a in-flight simulator up at CalSpan, where we did approach and landing test. We didn't see any problems, but we went to all the programs we could get information about that kind of environment and listen to what he had to say.
So yes. So wondering about anecdotes of weird behaviors.
Yeah, unexpected.
Well, I've got one to start with, and see if you have anything else to share, Tom. But we were talking earlier about we briefed this as an FCTP once. So one more question after this. But after flying around and landing, what we were finding was when you tried to stop the airplane, wide main gear, sort of close coupled nose gear, and in trying to stop the airplane, the brakes had a grabby kind of characteristic, and so when you tried to stop, one on one side might grab while the other side didn't, and it was doing this kind of herky-jerky motion. You looked like you were an idiot, trying to stop the airplane.
We called it the duck walk.
Yeah. It was funny, anyway, so it was fixed in two ways. One, and I don't know if you had the same observation, Tom, that I did, but the brake pedals, when you pushed forward on the brake pedals, for instance, you had to do that to set a parking brake, so you'd push them far enough forward to get them in front of a little servo that would come in and hold them that way. And it always felt to me like you had to push those pedals. Yeah. I had to extend my feet way farther than I should have had to do that. Now, if I was a swimmer, then it probably would have been easier. But anyway, so that felt really weird. Well, one of the fixes was improve the pedal angle so it wasn't so inconvenient to push the brakes. But the other one, well, another one was some brake material, but the other one that is completely unique was a thing we called cross-ship braking. So when you were pushing on one brake, it went to 3 brakes over here and 1 over here. And on this one, it was 1 over here and 3 over here. So that cross-ship braking also mitigated this kind of duck walk behavior. And then she stopped very nicely.
Yeah. That brake angle problem was present on the first few flights of the Ship 1. It caused Bruce a problem stopping the high-speed taxi. He couldn't get as much braking effectiveness as he wanted to get because his feet were horizontal. He's used all his angles. For a while, we flew with blocks that changed the pedal angle so we could get the decent pedal angle.
You gonna finish the braking story with Bruce? Well, so that's how the airplane actually, we learned what the ATB was for Advanced Technology Bomber, supposedly. But he had an issue with stopping the airplane, so it ended up going off the end of the runway into the overrun.
I was going to bring that up.
Which was not stressed. Was not stressed for the weight of the airplane, and it ended up sinking into the asphalt, so it became the all-terrain bomber instead.
That's true. It's a good joke.
Yeah, I have to tell Bruce that when you see him. Or we've had enough. One, right, sir, right there. I'm just going to restate. So you're asking about Guam and the mishap, the crash that was really a complete destruction, and having to do with moisture and the air data. Do you want to talk to that?
Yeah.
Or you were either way.
Guam was a terrible environment for the B-2 for several things. One thing, when it set on the ramp, the flight control bays, you actually had to spend time with the airplane. I'm trying to remember whether it was full nose down or full aft, but anyway, you had to drain the water that would collect in that area before you would get to altitude, or you create a bunch of ice. The air data system, by the way, that was a phenomenal design. I think tribute to the engineers that put that together. Those things, you know, it worked fine for our airplane to be in the normal environment at that time. We could go up to 29,000 feet very accurately, and then we could do the every 2,000 feet above. And then the FAA said, we need to do more at high altitude. We need more flight levels up there. You got to prove your system is accurate, as accurate as it was to 29,000 as it is up to 40,000. And the B-2 tested that, and that data system passed it all without any modifications. That's how accurate it was.
So, but as far as the mishap goes, here, let me, so as far as the mishap goes, what had happened to them was that the air data system got biased off. And with all that moisture in Guam, the ports would get water resting in them. We have a pitot heating system that heated those flush air data ports and evaporated the water out of them. But as long as that water was in there, then they were going to get an inaccurate reading. So the system got biased off, so when that air crew took off, when they finally rotated, so while the airplane is on the ground, it's not using that air data to run the airplane. And then when they rotated and it started to use that air data to run the airplane, to run the flight controls, the accumulation of things that I'll talk about in just a moment produced a bias in the system, and the airplane thought that it was too low an angle of attack, and so it was pitching up. So the alpha limiter down and an alpha limiter up, and so it thought it was alpha over pitched and needed to be pitched up, and that's what it was doing. It was pitching up, and there was a lot of simulator practice after that. It was an unrecoverable thing for those crew. So what had gone on was the airplane has a pitot system testing capability in it. And and it's and what folks were doing were they were testing the pitot system before they flew to see that it was okay. And we didn't have any procedure created to where when they tested it that they made sure they burned out the water before they tested it. We didn't have a procedure like that.
We didn't need it.
That they were taking this action out of some concern about whether the pitot system was going to be accurate or not for them. It wasn't part of a normal checklist. It was just created as a thing that they thought they should do, albeit with, as I understand it, some Northrop engineering encouragement to do that. As a caveat, there is a turn the pitot heat on more than 2 minutes before you take off.
And they did that.
Procedure, and they did that. But once you've done the testing, then the system has now been calibrated in a wrong place. And as I understand it, it was actually a buildup of miscalibrations that produced that mishap. That's what happened
I
there.
think I recall that the calibration was required because sitting on the ramp with water in those things, it was telling the airplane they had a problem.
Yes, you're right. The airplane was talking about having a problem, but that stuff needed to be cleaned out. And anyway, so.
Wasn't part of the procedure. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go with one more, sir, because he's the boss of all of us. Mike. I presume.
No. you're
Oh,
talking about-
Tom, you're the closest one to be able to speak to that. But let me just,
yeah.
first of all, iterate for both of us. We're test pilots. We don't do that stuff, despite what you see in the movies. Test pilots don't go to war. They don't. Our job is to make sure things can be used, but it's not to shoot down airplanes or blow up targets other than for test. But we can certainly relate, and Tom's the closest one, I think, between us to be able to do that.
Yeah, think about how to approach this. We don't get those kinds of mission details from the wing. We're not in their information, and they wouldn't share that with us anyway, I imagine, just because why give the enemy any more information of what it takes for you to do your job? So no, I don't know. There is a video on YouTube that makes claims that they know what happened in the mission. I don't believe it. I don't think that information got released. But the first one, I'm pretty sure, was at night. That wasn't a fun mission. I got asked why they're using KC-135s where they got the K-46, and I asked them. I told them at night refueling. You still have the vision system problem with the KC-46. You wouldn't take a risk of the B-2 getting dinged by a boom, except with a KC-135 and a boom operator sitting right in the boom pod. So,
Yep.
get it?
Probably not really a lot to add other than typical tactical considerations. You're going a long way. The airplane needs to be able to get to different alternative places along the way. We were supposed to be able to go 6,000 miles unrefueled, 10,000 miles with the refueling. The airplane can do that, but when it comes to real application, then you need airplanes in places in order to support that. And probably the biggest thing to comment with regard to that is, and the news has made a big deal about it, that rightfully so, the coordination required for that to go halfway around the world, have the tankers there when you need them, because they need to be there when you need them, and arrive there, and you're there at the same time that things came out of the water and landed where they need to go, and other airplanes are where they need to be, was huge. And our plane had the communication capability, and we as a military have the planning capability to put all that together. It's, she's an airplane for now and for the future. Okay. So. Thank you.
I don't think we missed it.